As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Israel's plan to create a buffer zone inside Gaza along its border with Israel will take 16% of the Strip's territory. And this was reported by the Wall Street Journal, and they cited an analysis of this operation being carried out by Israel that was done by a Hebrew University geography professor. So Israel has begun the process of constructing this zone, which involves demolishing Palestinian homes and agricultural land that are in the way. And this buffer will be about 1 kilometer in width, which is about 0.6 miles. And when you're talking about an area like Gaza, a relatively small territory, that is a significant chunk of land that they're taking. So I was surprised to see that it's actually 16%. So Israeli media reported in January that Israel had destroyed 1,100 of the 2,800 buildings in these border areas that it intends to destroy. So Reuters reported last week that under the direction of then President Donald Trump, the CIA launched a covert campaign in 2019 on social media to turn public opinion in China against the government. Former U.S. officials said that Trump's authorization allowed the CIA to take action in China and in countries where Washington and Beijing are vying for influence. Operations to denigrate China on social media were carried out in Southeast Asia, Africa, and the South Pacific. The CIA also leaked disparaging intelligence to international news outlets to paint China in a bad light. So to me, that's a big part of this, saying that the CIA was leaking things to the media. If you look at 2019, 2020, there's so much negative media coverage of China. And I mean, like, even before COVID, 2019, this is when the narrative about the Uyghurs really started to kick off, and you had Mike Pompeo declare it was a genocide, even though there's no evidence of that. And, you know, this definitely makes me suspicious of those types of narratives that were pushed. There was also this big organ harvesting accusation. So the former U.S. officials speaking to Reuters, they did not offer much detail about the social media campaign, but said that CIA operatives using false identities were spreading narratives about corruption in China and about Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative. The officials claimed that the actions were a response to China using covert means to spread its global influence. Reuters said that it was unable to determine if President Biden has continued this campaign. I would guess there's a very strong chance that he did, because he's taken a very hard line against China, all this military expansion in Asia, increased support for Taiwan, and all that. And Biden's CIA also opened a new spy center dedicated exclusively to China. And William Burns has been very outspoken about the CIA's work against China. He's actually just said publicly that they're rebuilding their spy networks inside China, which is something you would think he would want to keep. The CIA would want to keep quiet, but, you know, he's been talking about this stuff openly. So in response to this report, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the CIA operations show that the U.S. uses, quote, public opinion space and media platforms as weapons to spread false information and manipulate international public opinion, end quote. China has maintained its increase in patrols near Kinmen, which are those Taiwanese-controlled islands just a few miles off the coast of mainland China, where U.S. Army Special Forces are now stationed. The Chinese Coast Guard stepped up its presence near Kinmen, known as Quemoy, in China, after 2 Chinese fishermen died last month when their boat capsized while being chased by Taiwan's Coast Guard. So according to the South China Morning Post, 8 Chinese Coast Guard vessels patrolled waters near Kinmen on Friday and Saturday. China's Taiwan Affairs Office described the patrols as a normal act because, quote, Taiwan is part of China and regular law enforcement in waters near Quemoy is the duty of the mainland Coast Guard, end quote. So Taiwanese authorities said that they warned off the Chinese vessels and they condemned the patrols, of course. The U.S. also got involved. I mean, you know, you talk about meddling in other people's affairs. So the U.S. condemned the Chinese patrols. And again, these are islands that are at certain points only 2.5 miles away from China. And you have the U.S. making statements about it. A U.S. State Department official said that China's continued provocations in waters close to Kinmen revealed its intention to unilaterally change the status quo. And this latest incident comes after Taiwan confirmed that there are American Green Berets permanently stationed on Kinmen to help train. We don't know exactly how many. It's probably a small amount, maybe a few dozen, but still, it's you put the shoe on the other foot here. And I know, so China has kind of a reason to increase these patrols separately of U.S. troops being there, the two Chinese fishermen who died. And it was reported that U.S. troops were in Kinmen before that happened. So China had a reason, but maybe there's a chance that they are doing this also to kind of send a message to the U.S. like, hey, what are you doing? What do you think you're doing here? So it's just an area to keep an eye on.
You expressed a view that it's unlikely that state actors will get involved. Suppose Netanyahu does, as he's been threatening to do, attack Hezbollah. Will Iran allow that to happen without resisting it militarily? And how powerful or sophisticated is the Iran military and the weapons it has?
The strange thing is Iran is very powerful militarily. And if Iran went into a full-scale war, there would be mass bloodshed in Israel and throughout the Middle East. Actually, the Iranians don't want it. They're not chomping at the bit for war. They've, in fact, faced so many provocations, so many assassinations, so many murders. Most people do not want war. They know that war destroys their societies. War leads to tragedy. War has no happy ending. Hezbollah doesn't want war. Lebanon doesn't want war. Egypt doesn't want war. Jordan doesn't want war. Syria doesn't want war. Iran doesn't want war. They actually don't want war. I speak to their diplomats. We're the ones that think war is somehow a natural thing. And Israel wants the war. Israel wants a wider war. And we've got enough dunderheads in our Congress that'll always stand up and talk about war. And we have a government adrift right now. And Israel's trying to provoke a wider war. Nobody else wants it because they know that it's tragic. It's a disaster. It should be the normal state of affairs, by the way, that people say, how do we end the war? But we don't even have that in Ukraine, a war that has gone on for well over 2 years, killed hundreds of thousands of people. You don't hear one senior American official saying, how do we end it? And we have that utter fool, Senator Lindsey Graham, now back in Kiev saying, yeah, you fight on, because he's been at the core of this warmongering for a decade, back to the overthrow, to the coup, to the Maidan. They just love throwing Ukrainians to their death in fighting the Russians because they think it somehow weakens Russia. So this idea that, yeah, it's going to trigger a wider war, well, it could, but I can tell you, no one wants a wider war except some of our side. And we've lost track about this because the U.S. is in perpetual war. Britain loves a war. But remember, Britain was the most violent country in the world for about 200 years. Beat the hell out of everybody because that's imperial mentality. But most of these countries don't want war. They want the United States to put a stop to its own arming of this bloodshed. It's not hard, by the way, to understand that because every few days, a vote comes up in the UN Security Council, and the U.S. stands alone in the opposition to a ceasefire or to peace or to a solution. We're alone in this. So we got to get our own heads on straight. We're the ones that prolong these wars. We're the ones that are talking about war with China. Are we crazy? We're the ones that have American soldiers in Taiwan right now. Are we crazy? Even if they're just for training, what are we doing?
We're provoking. They're there as a tripwire. One of them will get hit with a drone, and old Joe or whoever's pulling the strings.
Well, Lindsey Graham will say, now we have to have World War III.
Correct. It'll be their excuse. I know you don't like hypotheticals, but do you envision Russia or China getting involved militarily in the Middle East if Iran is attacked by Israel?
No. What I do imagine, though, is the whole world uniting against the United States and Israel as the last two countries that are in this absolute war mentality.
What will it take for that to happen? It hasn't happened yet.
It's interesting. We talk about the China threat. China has not been in a war, in any war, for more than 40 years. And the last war that China was in, 1979, 1980, was a very brief skirmish with Vietnam. And that had to do with the Cambodian disaster, which the U.S. provoked. Other than that, China does not want wars. the whole idea that China's this great militaristic threat is, again, a propaganda line of our deep state. It's another game. China is superb, actually, at saying, would you calm down? Could everybody sit down? China's the one that brought Iran and Saudi Arabia together. Could the United States ever have done that? No, it wouldn't even have been in American mentality that you bring two antagonists together. Better stir the pot. That's better for the empire. But China wants it a completely different way. So what I would say is that if this war expands, what China and Russia will do is to bring the whole world along, demanding peace. And that they will be very effective in doing. And the United States' place in the world, which is just disappearing in respect and in what people are seeing, that will absolutely end up with us in complete isolation.
This next one on. This got a lot of attention yesterday. Here's the Washington Post. Lindsey Graham visiting Kiev urges Ukraine to pass mobilization law. Now, they've already lost upwards of 500,000 people in this war, but it's not enough for Lindsey Graham. Put on that next one. This is the Hedge article, and here's a quote that is worth paying attention to. On his latest of far too many visits to Ukraine, Senator Lindsey Graham on Monday urged legislators to expand the pool of citizens subject to being drafted and thrown into the country's losing war against Russia, saying, and here's a quote from Lindsey Graham, "We need more people in the line." The question is, what is he talking about? Who is we? We need more of you to go and die.
Well, he speaks from a psychological position that he believes he's one of the key kingmakers of the empire.
Yeah.
You know, no, there is no American empire. We're fighting for liberty, and liberty and a constitution. So, but he sees himself, and they themselves become, the authoritarians, but the experts. They're the definer of what truth is and whether or not we even should be fighting this law. They go over to fight for the Constitution. This is the irony. They go over and they say, well, we're fighting for our Constitution and our liberties to fight an unconstitutional and an immoral war. They don't even bother with the Constitution. Why were we? Oh, we're not involved. Oh no, we just financed the whole thing, and then we sneak some people in there, and then we give them all their weapons and say, "And our hands are clean. We wash our hands. We have gone no harm. We always fight for righteousness." And that's where Graham identifies with. He believes he comes to the point he believes it, but it's demagoguery that their ultimate goal is sometimes difficult to figure. Other than because it's hard for me to put Graham in the cultural Marxist position, because I think there's a Marxist motive in a lot of what we do, especially domestically, and our administration does that. It's a Marxist system, and therefore chaos is necessary. I don't think Graham comfortably fits right into that, even though he's a co-worker, because he's causing the chaos and the bankruptcy of this country, because there's never enough bombs and things to send around the world for Graham.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the this push to get the Europeans to spend more on military. And Trump is big on this. You better carry your weight. You better spend that 2% of your GDP on the military or else. Well, if the Europeans really did feel so threatened by Russia, would you have to be twisting their arms and cajoling them and threatening them to spend more on their military? It just shows that they really don't feel threatened. And in fact, if they were threatened, would they be giving all the weapons to Ukraine? They'd be, keeping the weapons there to protect against, the Russian horde that's coming. So the reality is their behavior completely is a mismatch from the rhetoric of the neocons and the pro-war faction.
Yes, and I can't see that really changing. There's not going to be any magic. I don't think they're going to get the spirit of what he's looking for. The Graham people saying, we're fighting Russia. Don't you know that? I think they lose their ammunition when they are still back fighting the Cold War in 1946. And the mess we've had after the war ended. So too bad. But I think that this is going to linger until there's a lot more people die, and we already know that we're involved, with all the technology and all the money and all the troops, and that'll eventually end. But we also have troops in there. We have troops on the land in there, and most people recognize that. Nobody would argue, oh, there's not an American in Ukraine at all. Well, we were the first ones in there. We led the charge, and of course, that was in 2014.
Yep.
They knew we were there, but this is not going to be stable for a while to come.
Yeah. Well, let's do a couple of things from this article. You put on that next clip, because here's the point of the Politico piece. It's no longer, as you say, Dr. Paul, about recruiting new soldiers. It's about persuading them not to quit. This week, French Armed Forces Minister Sébastien Lecornu presented a talent retention plan to incentivize military personnel to remain. This comes a few days after an annual report submitted to the German parliament show that in 2023, some 1,537 soldiers left the Bundeswehr, reducing it to 181,514 personnel. Go to the next one now. Here is the problem they're facing. The conversations now exist in all capitals, in all democracies that are professional armies without conscription, Le Cornu said on Monday. At NATO meetings, we can talk about equipment, but we also have to talk about the level of retention. And they go on to talk about the fact that there is a renewed discussion over some kind of national reservists being reintroduced. Germany got rid of conscription in 2011, but the others and Germany are thinking about bringing it back and conscripting women as well to serve. You know, that may, as much as we oppose the idea of conscription, that may bring it home to these young people that they're not playing, they're serious, they want you to die.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about this because people will pop up in this country talking about the institution of the draft. But the draft, you know, was removed in the early 70s and it was gone for a while, and then they wanted to restore registration, and that was a big fuss in the House, and they were determined to have the registration. But there, you know, it was the best part of the, the Cold War. There was no at the end of the Cold War, there was no tension like we needed troops, but they went ahead and they did this, and they got with difficulty, they finally got the registration back. Why did they have to have the registration? To me, it's a psychological thing. Yeah. Because do you think in this day and age, they don't know where everybody is, what their age is, and where they work, and whether they ever made a phone call to China, you know, that sort of thing. They know everything, but they had to have the registration because there would be people, you know, if things get really tough, and if this determination to fight Russia in Ukraine, if the Europeans won't do it, we run out of money, we just need more troops, they'll do it. They're not beyond it at all to do it. They're capable of doing it, and they'll think they're serving a great purpose by instituting the draft. Yeah. So I'd be concerned, but I don't think that's enough to get people worried about next year. Yeah. I hope not anyway, but they're capable. The fact is, the draft registration is there, and the ready recall is available. But let's hope the American people are awake enough to refuse to accept that.